Hello, welcome, good afternoon. Happy to have everyone here today to a very special edition of our Green Buzz Agency webinar series. With so much going on in the world, we especially thank you for joining and spending this strategic lunch hour with us. My name is Todd Plotkin. I'm the CEO and founder of Green Buzz Agency. Today, I'm excited to be joined by an amazing mind and leader in the media and business space, Patrick Jager, for a very special interactive fireside chat. Today's episode will focus on two main topics. First will be reverse engineering your content strategy based on KPIs. And then second will be strategically thinking about tomorrow's opportunities. So if you are looking to advance your content strategy, this is the right place. Now, if any of our audience members ended up here and you don't know who we are or what we do, Green Buzz Agency is a full-service video production company. We're based in Washington, D.C. We specialize in brand advancement and messaging through video. We've supported major video marketing and campaign initiatives throughout the pandemic and are always eager to find solutions for your marketing needs. So drop us a line at info@greenbuzzagency.com to learn more. And with that, I will kick it over to my colleague, Amelia, for some housekeeping items.
Yes, thank you, Todd, for that intro, and hello, everyone. Before we really dive in, I'm just going to take a moment here to make sure everybody knows what to expect from today's conversation and that you guys are all familiar with the features on the platform, although I know by now you're all probably Zoom experts. So first, the conversation will be an hour long and will include an interactive discussion, as Todd mentioned, with today's panelists for 40 minutes. And then make sure you stick around to the end of the session because that's when we'll devote the last 20 minutes to opening the floor to all of your audience questions. And just want to mention that today is our 22nd webinar in our series, the second of 2021. So if you want to check out any of our previous episodes or revisit some of the top line strategies we've covered throughout the year, visit greenbuzzagency.com/blogs. There you'll be able to see your favorite on-demand recordings of all of our episodes, which include strategies and ideas from executives at Twitter, PBS, Make-A-Wish, NASCAR, Lego, and many, many more.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely worth going back and checking out. But finally, we have made it through the gauntlet of the many, many housekeeping items, and we get to introduce you to Patrick Jager. Patrick is the founder and CEO of Core Innovation Group. It is an award-winning media company, and he is the media executive behind it. And he has powered shows like Fixer Upper and Behind the Music. He is a veteran in the TV and media production space. Patrick has developed programming for countless outlets, including MTV, Sci-Fi, Nickelodeon, Bravo, and NBC News, and serves as a member of the Academy of the Producers Guild of America. Amelia?
Yeah, so that was a very awesome broad strokes introduction. Welcome, Patrick. And so we just wanted to kick off the conversation with a question about if you can talk to us a little bit more about what you do at Core Innovation and what your day-to-day role looks like.
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for having me. And I have to say that I sound a lot more important than I think I am. But with that in mind, so what Core came about because I hit a wall in television where we were just doing the same thing over and over and over. And the media landscape was changing so fast. And I really wanted to make sure that I was staying very relevant in terms of where are we going. So Core's job is to work for our clients and reassess the value and purpose of content from the ground up. So it's not just, let's come up with a big idea, let's do a campaign. You know, I'm not an agency. I'm not trying to be an agency. I understand all the channels of distribution. I understand time buys. I understand all that. I do all of that, but I don't do it with a agency perspective of big idea leads to success. Instead, I really have always tried to focus on what are you trying to get out of content? And in doing that, you know, if it's a Fortune 500 client or a small client or a television or media client, I think so much of what I try to do is strip away what people know and think about what they don't. And that has gotten me in trouble when I have been in-house because people are like, this is what we do. And my theory is, why do we do that? We should be thinking about what it is we do at all times and questioning, is this the right thing to do? So that's really what Core's job is. And I do that across a very broad spectrum of clients.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I feel like that's the perfect segue into this first topic, which we want to dive into, which is redefining our relationship with content by reverse engineering strategy based on a specific KPI.
Yeah, it's probably not as technical as what it sounds, but I've honed this really after, for a long time in television, it was always about, we would pitch a big idea, we would pivot that idea depending on where we were going. Todd knows this very well. You come up with an idea and it might be this way for history and it's this way for MTV and it's this way for Animal Planet, but it's the same idea. Now, how you can have one idea that hits those three, it makes no sense. But that's how we all did it, is you'd come up with an idea and you'd pitch everyone. Right now, today, as we're having this conversation, Real Screen is happening, and which is where I met Todd. And Real Screen is a industry confab for people in the cable television world. And every cable company is there, and every production company is there. And it's a lot like, I always say, it's a lot like a high school party. The jocks are over here, and the nerds are over here, and the preppies are over here, and they don't really talk to one another. But you go around and you try to pitch these big ideas, and what you're seeing is that doesn't work. Like, that's not how success is made. Most of these networks are seeing that now too. You don't just come up with a big idea, you back into an idea that's great. Sometimes it goes viral, but it shouldn't be about the big idea anymore. So that's really where this came from. It wasn't rocket science because I am a marketing major. I do a lot in business, but I've never taken a business course. I do a lot in finance, but I've never taken a finance course. This is really kind of the course of life, should I say. One of the things that we talk about a lot, this is what I was just saying, this idea of the big idea, and that is the what. What are we going to build? And then people pontificate about what the end result. Oh my gosh, it's going to be so huge. We're going to do this thing, and it's going to be bigger than sliced bread, and it's going to go viral, and we're going to have it on all these distribution channels. But what they aren't thinking about is this unknown, which are all the ways that that idea then has to be manipulated to have an end, or the end result has to be manipulated to justify the content model. And again, that has really been the thing. There was a time when you would go to Real Screen, it would be, what's my Duck Dynasty? Everybody would say that. And now it's, what's my Fixer Upper? Everybody says that. Well, that's Fixer Upper is Fixer Upper. Duck Dynasty is Duck Dynasty. Why are you trying to emulate? And I think so much in content is emulating. You really see this during the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, I talk a lot, I've written a lot about how much people were pandering. And that pandering was because we only knew how to do one thing. It's love and support. We support, and everyone started to sound the same. And because of that, no one sounded authentic, and you lost your voice. What the true standouts have done in this is say, let's start over and talk about who our audience is. And what do we want to get out of that audience? Let's not just barrage that audience with love and support and shots of nurses with their, looking sad. So I think that this time has really forced a lot of people to rethink what content means. And that's what I hope we can help people today think about in their own world.
That's awesome. Yeah. So if you want to shift now and show us what your content model looks like.
Sure. So again, not rocket science. And this is not copywritten. I want everybody to use this. But really, rather than thinking about the big idea, first think about the return. What's the return you're trying to get? Is it a return on investment? Is it a return on engagement? Right now, most content's engagement. You can have direct to consumer where it is about lead gen, but at the end of the day, you're not going to make your money back from your content. Content for most people is marketing. But what is the return you're trying to get? And more importantly, what are the KPIs you're trying to hit? What are the clear things you want out of your content? Are you trying to get people to go 2 clicks down the funnel? Are you going for, is it an awareness? Is it all about actual sales engagement? Is it about getting people to volunteer their time? Like, whatever the thing is. And Greenbuzz, you guys are very, very good at thinking about the KPIs. I've always been really impressed by that. But for most people, again, the traditional model would say, well, let's just make it, we'll figure out how to evaluate it later once we start to see metrics. I really think that that's not the right thing to do. What are the metrics you need? because that addresses who is your audience for that metric. Who is the person that you're going to go to, and they're going to say, aha, that's exactly what I was looking for. And then where is that audience? You know, is that audience a 27-year-old? So you want to be looking at purely digital outlets? Is that audience a 45-year-old? So Facebook pre-roll can work for them. More money is wasted in marketing and content, making something and then trying to figure out where to put it, or putting it where you traditionally would put it, even if that's not the audience that you made it for. So I would submit that this is the most important thing. It doesn't matter what the idea is. Put your hand, I want everyone to put their hand over the what, because it doesn't matter what you're going to build if you don't know who it's for and what they're looking for and how to articulate that. You know, Tom Steyer spent a lot of time during this last election trying to get to Gen Zers to register to vote. And you think that that would be an easy task. It was incredibly Herculean to do, but that was done micro-targeting just them. Most people on this call today didn't see what his work was, because I am not a Gen Zer. I know I look it, but I'm not. So if I'm not the audience, then why would people make something for me? Like you didn't see his work on Facebook, I would assume, because that's not where Gen Zers are. They repel Facebook. So again, if you can figure out the important things, the metric side of that, the business side of that, then the margin between what is known and unknown becomes much, much smaller, and that idea can be tailored to be something that actually is about moving the needle. And quite frankly, I actually think, and I've been proven right and wrong on this, but I've been proven right that the more you create these parameters, the more what you create can be an amazing idea. I mean, Fixer Upper was created that way. The parameters were, we wanted to have a family or somehow related that did real estate design and construction because they had done so well with Property Brothers. Now, I mean, this is kind of like what's our Duck Dynasty? It was what's our next Property Brothers? But the metrics of that was very, very defined. And that allowed us to really build something that clearly did great because we had predefined it. We weren't just pitching a family in Waco. We were pitching based on the return and the audience they were looking for. You know, there's a reason why you don't see a fixer-upper model on Netflix. Their audience is different. And so if they're going to do this reverse engineering, they're going to reverse engineer into the type of people that work for Netflix. And it doesn't matter if you're doing television, you're doing podcast, you're doing commercial, or you're doing industrial, or you're doing nonprofit. It doesn't matter what kind of content you're building. If you don't understand the technical side, you're wasting money on content.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable, because initially when we even started this webinar series was because it was like this massive transition to digital because of COVID. And I think so many people are just checking boxes in the digital space. So really putting those parameters in is just the best baseline.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, in terms of KPIs, and obviously it varies from platform to platform, but what KPIs, when you go into something, let's say we're talking about digital content, digital video content, what KPIs are you most interested in? What really stands out to you? Like, that's where the focus should be.
For me, performance is really about time spent more than it is about the number of clicks. For me, it's much more about engagement than it is about volume. Because you know, Twitter's a great example of, you can get great volume, but the half-life of a tweet is a nanosecond. So are you really going to get engagement in that? Now, obviously, some people do get engagement from Twitter, but for most people, it is not going to be that is not going to be a platform where you can have that type of KPI. If you're going for an engagement KPI, I wouldn't go to Twitter. I would go to Instagram. I would go to now TikTok. I would go, you know, I would look for other ways to do that. So I do think that this goes back to, before it's even the video's KPIs, it's what is the goal of the reason we're going to make this video in the first place, or this content in the first place. If it is to sell a widget, the type of content you're going to develop is going to be very different than if it is to inspire someone to take a different type of action, or to get people to understand who your brand is. So I guess I'm sorry, this was kind of a long-winded answer to say that I don't even think it's about a video KPI as much as it is, what's the purpose you're trying to get apart? Because one of the things I've really tried to demonstrate to people is that content is not video. You make video, I make video, but we also do other things. And a lot of times that's part of the fallacy is, oh, well, we have to make content, we have to make video content. Well, do you? Couldn't this be could you make a really cool GIF campaign? Could you make a really cool audio campaign? Could it be, is this like, is the problem really your UI and your UX of your website and what you're putting there? And it's not so much about content you're making off platform. So I don't know if that answers your question. You can ask it another way and I'll get to it. But I do think that, not only is it what's your desired outcome, why does this outcome matter for you? And are you able to measure that outcome? And how can you influence that outcome? I mean, it's one thing to say that I want to measure it, but it's another thing to think about, does that video help influence that outcome, or is it tacit or tangential?
Cool. And I'll throw it over to Amelia for the next question. I will say anecdotally that one thing that really, really surprised me, Greenbuzz Agency is in its 11th year. And I would say the first, 7, 8 years, the amount of strategy that was ready to go in terms of what to do with the video content once it was made was very minimal. And that was always very shocking to me. And I felt like a huge missed opportunity. And look, video production, regardless of how you do it, it is at minimum, it is very time consuming. And on the other end of the spectrum, it can be very, very expensive. So if you're going to put a lot of time, money, and energy into something, to have that understanding of where it goes is critical. So Amelia, I know you had a next question.
Yeah, I think we can move to the next slide and start getting into what your thoughts are, Patrick, on how brands can start shifting their top-down approach and rethinking their strategy and focus on the end user, especially if that kind of is a new approach for a brand.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, you know your brand better than anybody. So there is a point where you have to be instinctive and not take the advice of your PR firm, not take the advice of your agency, not take the advice of your video company, and really think internally. And this is where it becomes very hard, because people say, we've done the same analytic forever. We understand our analytics, we understand our audience. Well, my argument is, do you? If you do, you don't need me. If you do, you don't really need what Greenbuzz does. You need just a generic video production house that can do, whatever. If you need someone, if you need a time to reassess and reevaluate, there is no time like now. And there's always a reason why someone can say, well, we don't really need to evaluate. We just need someone that can execute on what we want. Fantastic, good for you. But again, first and foremost, you have to be willing to really strip away your analytics, because that's the fallacy. What's the CAC of getting a new customer? Well, your CAC is your CAC, cost of acquisition. So if you've always done it this way, but you're not willing to strip that away and think about it in a new way, then the cost of acquisition is always going to be the same. Have you thought about what a different channel and a different approach might do? So you have to be willing to think from scratch, and you have to be willing to look past what you've done. And that's going to threaten a lot of people. If you have an analytics team in your company, they're very used to manipulating numbers to prove a point. You have to be willing to say to analytics or to whatever, I want to strap it all down and start from scratch. So I think that's number one. And number two is to be willing to pivot where you're investing your time. A great case in point is if you are trying to change a demographic, like you need to change your demographic by 10 years to stay profitable, right? You need to drop it. 10 years is a very large chunk. I was at a company a couple years ago. We actually brought it down 15. And there was a lot of strategy that we had to do to get there. But one of the big strategies was we had to be willing to open new channels. The biggest problem with content is once you do it, you must keep doing it. So if you want to nurture a new end user or you want to nurture a new talent, you have to be thinking about how much are you willing to spend towards that. Creating a TikTok channel or hiring an TikTok influencer, which I have a lot I can say about influencers, but or establishing a podcast. If you're not willing to feed that beast once you've done it, you're actually wasting money yet again, because you're not going to see instantaneous. That's the other thing. People assume that the numbers speak for themselves instantaneously. Well, Schitt's Creek is a great example of a project that did very little in its first couple of years. Like it wasn't even a cult thing, but people had enough of a willingness to say, let's let this build out until ultimately it was the phenomenon it became. But that's a great example of, I've had shows where we've spent, to Todd's point, we spent an inordinate amount of money and time developing a show. And I remember this one show, we put it on network and the first episode didn't do very well. Well, they did zero promotion of it, zero. They just threw it up. And because it didn't do well, they took it off the air. We had, I want to say 8 or 10 episodes in the can that never saw the light of day because they said, well, that didn't work. You have to be thinking about the long game and how do you get from here to here? And if you're trying to pivot, if you're trying to move into something new and you go by knee jerk or the first analytics report that comes out, it's one thing if you're a startup and you're going analytics report to analytics report and you're pivoting like that. But if you're trying to do something big and you're pivoting every 2 minutes, you're not doing anything. So again, the biggest thing here is you have to be willing to strip away and start over. And every company should be doing that, on a regular basis. And I know, Todd, you guys advise your clients to do that.
Yeah. So I'm just curious because you brought up analytics a couple times. I'm curious in terms of analytics impact on content creation. I think, it was about 2.5 years ago, you'd be at a big marketing conference, maybe Content Marketing Worlds in Cleveland, and the number of sessions on analytics just jumped up. In previous years, there might have been a couple sessions on analytics, and then all of a sudden a third of all the sessions were on analytics. And, I think marketing folks in general were like, that's for finance, that's for operations, we're marketing, we're creative. And then you see it seep more and more into, it probably already was there in linear television, but you see it seep more into corporate video content as well. I'm just curious, as someone who has experience with analytics and certainly when it comes to content creation, how do you feel like it impacts the creative, process and content being made?
So I tend to be more in favor of analytics than I think a lot of people, because I think it proves this point about reverse engineering. Having just a great idea. I mean, it's one thing if you have all the money in the world and you can just throw something up and your audience, and if you're a Red Bull or you're an Apple, you already know your audience, and it's more about reiteration of brand value than it is about brand awareness. No one needs to know what Apple is. If you don't know Apple now, you have an issue. But I think it's a delicate balance. I mean, you need to have someone on your team that's like that. All that analytics is great, but we need to take a risk here. The problem with analytics is, or that mindset. And again, I just had a stint, a couple year stint where it was all about the analytics to the point that there was no creativity. So you can go too far that way. There is a fine balance, but if you don't know how to assess, this is where I think analytics is important. If you do not have a way to track that KPI, if you do not have a way to demonstrate the value of the nuanced changes of content, and again, in corporate, it's all about the nuance change, really. But so it's a fine line. You have to be willing to have something that you can track. Having a big idea and just hoping it's going to do something is, I think that just, again, unless you have all the money in the world, I think that's crazy. But you also can't let analytics drive it down to, we need to change that blue to this color blue because that color blue tracks better. I mean, that color blue is not selling your widget. So I do have a balance on this. I'm working on a project right now where the client, sent a rough copy to multiple departments, and they're all looking at it with their point of view. So what those of us in content need to be able to do is say, that's great that you're thinking micro here, and you're thinking micro here, and you're thinking micro here. My job is to think macro. So that is the creativity side, it's the analytics side, it's the distribution side, it is the engagement side. Someone has to be willing to be thinking big picture. And if that is someone in-house, great. If that's someone out-of-house, great. But you have to be able to have that balance between the data and the art.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that that's so important, and something that you talk about in the article, which we've pulled this quote from on the screen, is this difference between innovating and emulating. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, because I think that some of these parameters that we're talking about, your audience, what they like, so you want to lean in, but then how do you continue to innovate?
I think this is where I think there's two things. Some people need to innovate, and some people need to, you go through these troughs where all you have to do is just keep going. You just nurture. You don't always have to be innovating. But you have to be willing to look for innovation. I think that it's kind of a fine line, but I think that the difference is there are some brands that innovate to innovate. They're just always trying to do that new thing. And it starts to be like their shtick is the innovation, but can you really tell me what they do? So I think that there is a fine line there. I think though that this is where you have to be like, I think that there's something really great about a yearly, if not more frequently, confab where you say, okay, let's strip away everything. What do we want to do? Where do we want to go? What comes next? And the companies that are thinking about the future versus thinking about the now, the companies that are trying to think about how do we start getting people ready for what we're going to announce next year, like those are companies that are using innovation in the right way. They're using it as an awareness campaign. They're not using innovation as a way to drive funnel. I do think of innovation as kind of that top of funnel stuff, and then stuff that, because then once you get people in the funnel, it needs to be about assuredness that they need to be doing whatever you're doing. They need to buy your thing. They need to come in for an appointment. They need to, whatever that thing is. So the big and splashy, that's why it's really interesting, I think, this time of year with the Super Bowl to see who's on the Super Bowl. And almost all that is top of funnel. It's either brand awareness or brand reiteration. It's not, coming to today for a 2-for-1 deal on a new car. It's really much more up here, because those ads are typically innovative in some way, shape, or form.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's honestly the perfect segue to our next section, which is about that next idea and strategically thinking about tomorrow's opportunity. And I love that you write and talk so much about this, because I think especially in COVID with so much unpredictability, this question is certainly top of mind, but even harder to think through.
Yeah, and I do think that is, I think this is the challenge for so many people. I mean, emulation, they're doing really well. They're doing really well. I want to do as well as they. Well, the question always is, do you take that, do you fish the pocket or do you fish the stream? I talk a lot about this. If you fish the stream, you might catch the fish, but the pocket might be harder to get to, but you might get more fish. So it really becomes where do you want to go? And this is where that reassessment comes in. You know, where do you want to be 5 years from now? And it shouldn't just be, I want to grow like that. Or it shouldn't be, I want to, you know, we're gonna double volume every year. That is, again, I never took a marketing class, but I don't think there is a marketing objective where it's just a 45-degree angle. If it is, that's a really weird class. It's a very short class. So the question becomes, you know, how circuitous do you want to get? Is it just we're very comfortable where we are right now? We just want to have a year where we just, you know, entrench? And you have to be willing to ask these questions. And I think that if you're a vendor or a consultant, you have to be willing to ask these questions of your clients. Are you looking to stay doing what you're doing? What is your ultimate goal? Where do you want to get? Because a lot of what we try to do is lay the groundwork for something that is going to really pop in a year. You know, my husband's in film marketing, and these are films that they're shot by the time they start to market them. So the widget's been done for a long time, or is in the process of being finished. But now you have to bring it and make it valid for today. And that's not easy because things are very fickle. So for those of us that have the ability to take content and use content as a way to drive both a current and a future narrative, you have to be willing to start from scratch. I have a project that we're trying to bring out to market right now. It's very ambitious. It's about how do we get past the divides in our country right now? How do we bring red and blue together, or conservative and liberal, or urban and rural? And you know, that is a very, very big project, and it's very hard to sell. We have a lot of people that are like, I love it, we can't buy it, because it's almost too audacious. They can't get around this what's tomorrow's opportunity, because they're thinking about, you know, we need train wreck television, or we need something where people are drinking and screaming at one another. Well, that's not the show. So a lot of times as content makers, you are taking a risk. And I think it's important for your clients to know that. If what you want is to stay in the level, this is just spots and dots advertising, right? We're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over and over. And then the repetitive nature is what people are going to do. So that is a really huge question to ask, full circle. How much do you want to change the dial, and where do you want to change that dial? If you don't know what you want to have come next, we can't help you with where you are today.
I mean, I think we've touched on it, but talk to us a little bit more directly about what you mean by don't invent the wheel, modify the wheelhouse.
Yeah, I don't think that there's no such thing as a new idea. There is no such thing as a new way to shoot. There is no such thing as a new way to edit. There's to engage. There isn't. It's the way that it's presented. You know, nothing in TikTok is new, but the way it's presented feels fresh and different. The people that are smart are people that are rethinking how do we rearrange the tools to get what we want. You know, I'm very into modular producing, because what works for your Southeast market might not work the same as your West market, but they all need the same content. It's just the way it's delivered. So if you create things that are modular, you're creating one thing, but you can rearrange it depending where you are. Very A/B test live. But I think that's you're not reinventing the wheel for each market. You're just changing it around. So that's a very direct and simple way of saying, don't say I want something don't say I want something viral. We're going to create something that's going to go viral for you. We're going to invent something that goes viral. No, you're not. Viral is luck. Viral and or a lot of money that you're going to spend to make something go viral. It's how do you rearrange to make something feel the most engaging you can. It shouldn't be about viral, it should be about engagement. So when you think about that, you don't need to tout that you're going to do something new. You're going to that's that whole idea of the traditional model. We're going to come up with a big idea and then we're going to figure out what to do with it. No, you're not. We're going to take all these building blocks that we know are important, and we're going to use those and rearrange them and modify the wheelhouse to make it be the very best thing you need. And, it's subtle, but it's really important.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to put it. And if we move to the next slide, we actually included an example here of a campaign that GreenBuzz recently did right at the onset of COVID. And the reason we chose this campaign to just illustrate as an example is because I think it brings together all these different building blocks that you've laid out. And so we didn't reinvent the wheel. This was something that we did for an Instagram live stream, and it just had a massive amount of engagement, and it was created for a very specific KPI for our clients stand together to raise money, to raise very quick cash assistance for families that were affected by COVID. So we brought together some interesting conversations. We had a host, and we hit that KPI. We surpassed the expectations, and it was a very simple but strategic campaign. I think it really kind of brings together all these things that you've been talking about. So we can just play a quick clip so you all can see that.
Donnie Jones here, host of Stand Together Live, and I wanted to let everyone know that we have formally wrapped season 1 of the show. This is also the end of our hashtag Get Together Now campaign, which closed out by raising $61,090,938. You empowered us to help over 122,000 families. That's incredible. In terms of families, right?
Yeah.
That's $500 to these families that are truly in need.
We are actually changing things because of the power of collaboration. It's just a domino effect. We're stronger together.
I want to say thanks to you, the viewer, and to those of you at home who took time to donate. Never forget that you have the power to positively impact someone's life every day. Be sure to stick around to Stand Together's IG page, as we'll be posting our best nuggets from season 1 right here. And if you think we're gonna just stop right there, season 2, woo! Be sure to check it out.
I love that.
Yeah, it was a great campaign. And I think, it was just something that was produced so simply, and it was like one of our first forays into the virtual production, but people were so activated, engaged, and then Stand Together really learned that the Instagram lives were really funneling into their Instagram engagement, and they were able to also repurpose that onto other channels.
I just texted them because I didn't know that you had I didn't realize it was you guys that did that. So I literally was just texting them saying, I just saw your Get Together Now. That's how small this world is. And that is exciting to me, because it really is about what do people need right now. I did both the convention and the inauguration, and they were both very virtual, which was talk about reinventing the wheelhouse. We didn't change the wheel, we just changed the wheelhouse dramatically. And in the parameters of this pandemic have given people the opportunity, have forced people to reverse engineer content. And in forcing people to do it, really cool creative stuff has happened. So I applaud you guys for this. That was a really great campaign.
Thank you. So we can just keep moving on to this next section. And again, this idea is really something that we've been talking a lot about. And as Patrick, you've already mentioned, as soon as I saw this quote, the thing that came to my mind was the somber COVID music of all the big brands that were just, creating that one kind of narrative. And I'm wondering if there are any brands that come to mind that you think have been doing a really good job of programming.
I wish you would have given me that to research. I did, at kind of when everything was kind of in the pandering part of COVID. I was really looking for those examples. The ones that did it worst during COVID were the car companies. Talk about pandering. It was just, I think that places like, again, this is a BMS, but places like Nike, but I'll tell you, actually, one that I really appreciate is Airbnb. Clearly, nobody's traveling during COVID. So how do you use Airbnb as a platform to give people kind of the wanderlust of travel? And that's really cool. Like, if you know your model is not going to work right now, how do you reinvent the model? how do you, and that model was just to stay relevant enough that once people went, there was a brand recognition, like, oh, we should do it with Airbnb because they kept us entertained for the last few months. But that took a lot of chutzpah to get to the place that you were willing to create content purely for awareness and engagement that was not going to result in bookings. I mean, like that's pretty audacious. And to spend the money they spent, I don't know what their total spend was, but it was pretty impressive. And that to me is a brand that is saying, look, sometimes you do have to pivot and not think about what we knew, but try something different based on a set of parameters that we put in place. So I think they're a great standout example for me.
Cool. And I have a question for you that we didn't give you ahead of time. So just curious your general thoughts. I think of you as being sort of someone that knows a lot about a lot of different things, but at your core, you are a master of content creation. So just had a couple of questions, just even could be quick takes on them. But we talk a lot about video. We're both video people. But I'm just curious, like, it just seems like such an enormous boom going on with podcast and podcast content, and everyone, has an idea for it. And in talking to, I've recently been talking to some executives at Spotify, and they sort of feel like everyone during this downtime, during the pandemic, is just turning to podcasts. So they're getting, outrageous amount of people pitching them, and they're not sure how serious they are about wanting to move ahead. So I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on podcasting as a genre, as an alternative to websites, to video, to apps, as another kind of player in the space?
I personally love podcasts. Would I pay for a podcast? Probably not. So I think the challenge for me from an economic model is there's a very quick saturation that's happening on podcasts because it's a thing, and it's helping a lot of people, but I don't know how people are going to make money off of it. At least not at the scale. I mean, Spotify is a very different beast. So take Spotify out of that. But how does the podcast maker make enough? I mean, it's one thing if you're Michelle Obama or whomever, Harry and Meghan. It's a very different thing if I want to do a podcast or you want to do a podcast. So I ask clients of mine that want to do a podcast, let's first and foremost, you want to do a podcast, let's go through the reverse engineering and see how that works for you and what that can do in terms of audience generation, loyalty, what have you, number one. Then number two, how much are you willing to truly feed that beast? Because and I know, once you start it, like, had you only done 2 of these, people would be like, okay, whatever. But now that you're on 22, so but that takes a lot of staffing and preparation, and you have to know that if you're going to go into something, it doesn't matter if it's podcast or whatever, are you willing to truly feed that beast? Nothing drives me more crazy than to go on someone, if you're going to have a blog on your site, and the last one I see was from October of last year. What's the point of your blog? So I think that's a big thing to know, is like, do you want to create a podcast, or do you want to invest in a podcast that's already going on and present it? Does your podcast only work if you have a big influencer, and are you willing to pay that money? And are you willing to know that you're not really going to get the return that they're going to promise you? Like, there's so many things about that. I do love podcasts, but there are too many. Like right now, my Spotify feed is so big that I don't know really where to go. With my video series that I do, we were going to do a podcast version of it, but we were like, let's get really good at one thing before we try to do a second.
Yeah. Well, you spent a long chunk of time thinking about creative development, building. You mentioned at the beginning of this, taking that one big idea, bringing it out to a bunch of different networks, even if it maybe didn't make the most sense, and having to kind of alter it. I'll give you my viewpoint on creative development, and I'd be curious to kind of hear your thoughts on it and how you approach it. It seems to me, when you're creating a new show, a new idea, at least in television, you really have to go one of three paths. You're either going based off of talent, and who is this talent? They could be famous, they could be someone no one's ever heard of before, but they just really pop on screen. But in a lot of cases, I think the big media companies are wary of going with talent that doesn't have a built-in audience with them already, whether they're built-in audiences on YouTube, Instagram, wherever. They need to have something that is already built in that can follow them over. So that's one path. Another is a derivative of that, which is something that has a following already, whether that's a play, a podcast that we just talked about, just something out there, a radio program, a book, a magazine that you can take and transfer over their audience to something else. And then the third is just a completely original concept that's slightly different. I will throw out there, Floor is Lava obviously had an enormous year in 2020. And that's really not, and the host was great. I'm not taking anything away from the host, but it really has nothing to do with the host or a lot of the other elements. It's really the concept of the show. I'm curious, A, am I missing something? And B, like, what do you think in terms of the television industry as a whole? What is sort of the approach there? How are people doing it?
Yeah, I think you hit it. It's talent, IP, or format. And talent is interesting. I don't know if you remember Grace Helbig. She was a big YouTuber and she had this huge audience. So E brought her over to do a talk show that didn't do well because an audience that is digitally based doesn't want to go to linear television to watch their person. They don't need that. So just because you have an audience doesn't mean that you have an audience. Lily Singh, I think, is another great example of someone who, I don't know if she translated in the same way. Like the numbers did not add up, between digital and linear. But yes, talent. And the thing is now, talent used to be like when we first met Chip and Joanna, Joanna had maybe 1,000 people on Instagram, maybe, and she now has what, 20 million. But it wasn't for her, it was IP. They owned a construction company and a design firm and a real estate company, and they had the chops to do all this other stuff. But I've said this a million times, and Joanna says it in their book. We pitched them 8 times before the network picked them up, because they weren't that, to your point, they weren't this bankable star. And then format, like I always revel when a format gets sold that does feel fresh, and I'm like, how did no one think of that before? But Lava is a great example. I loved the format. It got boring, I thought, after a couple episodes, but I thought the format was super fun and very franchisable around the country. You can syndicate, or around the world, you can syndicate that like crazy. But would they take that from Greenbuzz or from Core? No. They're going to take that based off of who you know. So I think the biggest thing for people, between the talent, IP, and format probably is IP. What do you have? Like you talked about, a play, a book, of this or that. Like, what is that IP that you have that is so unique? And the only way it can get made is because of the IP you bring to it. I had a client once. He was, you met him, I think, Todd. It's a guy that I met at Real Screen who had all this great footage that he had shot, and he was supposed to be working with these producers. They didn't do anything with the footage. The footage he had was very specific to a time and place. And so he hired me to help him get out of that deal, broker a new deal, because his IP needed to get out there. And we did. We got it out there, and we got him partnered with a great production company. It got on air. But the only reason that anyone took it was because IP. The people before were selling him as talent, and he didn't have the numbers to make that sell, but he had great IP. So by selling it by that IP, we got it made. So yes, I agree with you. Those are the 3 things. But I think what's happening right now, especially because ad sales is so down from last year, people are going to, I think people in television are going to entrench. You're either going to see people making a massive financial dump into huge projects, or they're going to do same old that people have already done.
Cool. Well, I do want to transition now. I have many more questions here, which we could come back to if we have time. We have a good 8-9 minutes here. We have 3 awesome questions. I want to make sure the audience who has been with us gets their opportunity to ask you some questions as well. So I'll start with Len Rickman, who asks, what role, if any, do methods such as surveys and focus groups help measure impression, provocation, and return?
Hi, Len. Okay, so I have to be careful because my husband, who's in the other room, does focus groups for a living. But I personally hate focus groups because you're putting a lot of risk in a small pool of people that are going to make your outcome. Now, if it's his firm and in the film industry, they're very, very good at knowing who to get and why. Like they never do focus groups in LA or New York because people are jaded towards that industry. I hate doing focus groups, for example, in Las Vegas, because no one's there for a focus group. They're there to gamble and drink. So I think that they have a role, but it becomes, is it implicit or specific? Like, is it used to reiterate something or to kind of piece through problems? Or are you going to put all the eggs in that basket? Surveys the same thing. I think a good survey, the type of people that respond to survey are the people that are super, super pro or super, super con. And both of those can mess up your survey. So I think that they have a role, but I think as it relates to content, it should be a piece, not the piece.
Awesome. And we have another great audience question here. This attendee is talking a little bit about your work with Fixer Upper and Property Brothers and wants to know, once you have your concepts and ideas that all align with your audience and KPIs, how do you test and determine the one to go with?
Well, they do a lot of pilots in television, and that pilot is that test, and then they'll do focus groups off of that pilot, et cetera, et cetera. HGTV is a lot easier than other places because HGTV is very formulaic. They know their audience very, very well. They define into that audience. The reason there are 8 million Property Brothers, including a Fixer Upper, they're all the same show. Love it or list it. They're all the same show, because they know that's what their audience wants. So they're looking for who's a star that can lift and resonate very well. And I'm not saying that to diminish any of my friends at HGTV or Scripps or Discovery, so I apologize if it sounds that way. But they are looking now at breakouts that are going away from that, like when they did the Brady Bunch house. That was a big departure from what they would normally do, and it did well. But then, so does that mean you're going to do 400 of those types of shows? So I think that it's once it's there, like the problem with network or something like that is what they do then is just go around the margins. Like, there are 7 shows with the Property Brothers, but they're all kind of the same show. They just have a little different tack. One's with celebrity and one's First Home or Forever Home. So, the argument always is, once it's working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just create more of it. And that's always been my frustration with television, especially in the cable world. But at the same time, it makes them a lot of money. So, whatever it is you're doing, I go back to how often are you willing to stop and reassess, like, okay, so we've got these KPIs covered and we have this audience covered, but we still have this audience over here, and how do we get to them? And think about what it is needed, and not just say, oh, we'll come up with another Property Brothers show that gets to that audience, and really think about that audience and what you could do to make that audience do something.
Great, fantastic. The next question we have here from the audience comes from D. Emery. And the question is, I market higher education. We are developing an enterprise marketing campaign to showcase faculty. I understand it's important to create content that is not enrollment forward, but that is our number one KPI. Where do I begin?
So, first of all, if the mandate is, so you have 2 mandates here. You have a mandate to increase enrollment vis-a-vis instructors. faculty. That to me feels very much like a no-brainer. Todd, you and I could create this campaign tomorrow. The idea here is they are your IP and your talent. So when we talk about talent, IP, and format, they are your IP. Like, the reason people should come and be excited for your platform, your education, is these people that are providing that education. It's the same thing as when I work with a medical client. I want to know all about the doctor. It's doctor and patient story. It's the same thing in education. Teacher or educational arm and students that have done well from that educational arm. So I think you have a gold mine in working with, if conveying something positive about these incredible educators that you have doesn't get people excited to come and use your platform, it's a missed opportunity. I think you can do the two together very, very easily.
I love that. And I love that that was a real world case study that we got to touch on. And it looks like we're just about out of time. But before I get into the wrap up spiel, I do want to remind our audience that all those pull quotes that you saw came from Patrick's articles. They're all hyperlinked in the presentation, which you guys will all get a copy of. So you'll be able to revisit those concepts and this conversation. We'll be sending you the recording. So to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for tuning in. I usually say we hope this was an informative session. I know this was an informative session today. And if you are looking for marketing and communication strategy in 2021, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@greenbuzzagency.com. We've supported major video marketing and campaign initiatives throughout the pandemic. And so we are here to help you advance your brand and messaging in the new year and beyond. And stay tuned for our upcoming webinars and conversations. We have a very exciting and packed calendar for all of you in 2021. And check out greenbuzzagency.com/blogs to see the on-demand recordings for this episode or any of our previous episodes. And finally, a very enormous thank you to Patrick.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Great session. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.